Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I am excited to be here with you, as always, and excited to kick off a little bit of a sprint here for the next few weeks with the podcast. We're going to do something that is different than I've ever done before, and that is a massive kind of 12 to 13 episode sprint for the rest of this month. So for the following 3 weeks, this week and the 2 weeks after that, I'm going to release 4 episodes each week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And each week is going to focus on a different pillar of our practice. And the first week, this week, is pillar 1, meant to center around clinical topics. We're going to talk about the science of testing fatigue, which is happening today. Tomorrow will be ADHD and sluggish cognitive tempo and cognitive disengagement syndrome. The next one will be a little bit of a dive into performance validity testing. And the last clinical episode is going to be on report writing. So can't talk about report writing enough. Then next week, we're going to move to pillar 2, which is something I'm calling the business lab. We're going to be talking about how to reverse engineer and great reimbursement deep dive. So tackling CPT codes and averages across the country and what to expect from insurance panels. Gosh, talk about the ROI of a psychometrist. We're also going to talk about how to pivot to private pay and market those services if you're in an insurance saturated market. And then the final week, we are going to be talking about technology and specialized populations. So we're going to revisit the digital versus analog debate in test administration materials. We're going to talk about the ethics of efficiency and use of AI. We're going to talk about teleassessment and dive into that for a bit. And then the last technology episode is going to center around therapeutic assessment and kind of using therapeutic assessment as an intervention. Let's see. So not technology exactly, but it is adjacent. And then probably do a capstone episode that is going to serve as a bit of an audit for your practice, a full kind of clinical and business audit to make sure that you're headed in the right direction. So lots to look forward to over the next few weeks. Make sure if you have not liked and followed the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, now is a great time to do it because these episodes are going to be coming fast and furious over the next few weeks and give you plenty of content to check out. All right. So what are we actually talking about today? We are talking about a scenario that we know all too well. This is a scenario where you are 3 to 4 hours into a comprehensive battery. You are testing, you're like in the flow, but your client is struggling. This person is maybe slumping in their chair. The response times are lagging. There's a lot of how much longer, that kind of thing going on. So as a clinician, we now have a little bit of a crisis, primarily around validity. Is this poor performance on the DCAFs truly a reflection of executive functioning problems, or is it just that the brain is kind of checked out and fatigued? So we're going to do a deep dive into the science of testing fatigue, looking at the neurobiology, why the brain stops trying, cognitive networks that tend to fail first, and most importantly, how you can structure your batteries to combat this validity decay, so to speak. So as we get into these episodes, these are meant to be relatively short episodes over the next few weeks, okay? So I did use the term deep dive. It could certainly be a deeper dive. And that disclaimer, I think, applies to most of these episodes, right? I'm going to get into them as much as I possibly can and give you a good sense of what's going on. But of course, acknowledging there are folks out there who are truly experts and we can talk for hours about any of these topics. And let's see, the last thing I'll mention before I jump to the episode is an invitation to Crafted Practice. So for those of you who do not know, Crafted Practice is my in-person event that I host every year. This is the 4th year. It's in the summertime here in northern Colorado. It is beautiful. And this is the only in-person business retreat for testing psychologists. It's got 20 spots. I think at this point, there are maybe 16 still available for folks who want to come and connect with other people, have some spaciousness to relax and actually work on your practice, and hear some fantastic content from a couple of speakers around wealth management and financial leverage and tech, and mastering your tech stack and getting your practice dialed in from the technological standpoint. So if you want to get more information and register and come join us, we'd love to have you. It's an all-inclusive event. All you have to do is get here. You can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/crafted practice to get more info. Would love to see you there. All right, let's jump to this discussion on testing fatigue. Hey, everyone. Here we are. We're back. We're getting into it. All right. So I'm going to start this episode with a brief discussion of the neurobiology of checking out or testing fatigue. So I think to understand testing fatigue, we do have to move beyond just being tired. It is more than that. We're talking about actual cognitive fatigue, which is a measurable decline, essentially in executive control. All of us have experienced this. We really wrestle with this, as a practice that tends to do testing all in one day rather than breaking it up over multiple days. We do wrestle with cognitive fatigue. Now, some of that is by design to make sure and catch our clients at times when they are both fresh and not so fresh. But there are different perspectives on this, of course, and that's why some of you break up your testing days into multiple sessions, among other reasons. So we're going to get into this. Recent research in cognitive neuroscience, specifically around this concept called expected value of control theory, or EVC theory, gives us a clear picture of what is happening under the hood when you're experiencing some fatigue or checking out with your client. So the brain is kind of continuously performing a little bit of a cost benefit analysis for every task that it undertakes. All right. This process is primarily mediated by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the CEO brain, and the anterior cingulate cortex. Some of you are like, yeah, absolutely. Some of you are like, I don't know about that. And some of you are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. That's okay. That's the most I'm going to say about the anatomy and neuroanatomy of this process. But essentially, when a patient is fresh, the ACC, anterior cingulate cortex, signals that the reward of completing the task outweighs the quote unquote metabolic cost of the effort. But as fatigue sets in, the brain experiences a buildup of glutamate in the lateral prefrontal cortex, and that is troublesome. So a study published in 2022 found that high demand cognitive work causes glutamate to accumulate in the extracellular space of the prefrontal cortex, which physically makes further exertion taxing on the brain and can even be somewhat toxic. That seems like a strong word, but that's what the research is saying. So essentially, the brain's biological accounting system goes into like a self-preservation mode. It stops spending energy on high-level cognitive tasks to prevent further metabolic debris from building up. Okay, so if you want a very simple metaphor, it's like the more you ask the brain to work hard, it is sort of building up this trash or debris, so to speak. And if it gets to be too much, then it sort of poisons the system and leads to a little bit of a shutdown. So this ties directly into something we've discussed on the podcast before, mainly in the context of AI and report writing, and that is cognitive load theory. So you can think of working memory as any number of things, but the metaphor I'm picking here today is a glass of water. So intrinsic load is the water itself. It's kind of like the difficulty of the task. And then you have extraneous load, which is, the ice cubes, other things that have to go in the glass. So these are like distractions and bad lighting, or, the client's, physical sensations or discomfort. And when you put too much in the glass and it overflows, the client can no longer process information effectively. And, during a 6-hour assessment session, that glass is almost always overflowing by the afternoon session. So there's a little more nuance to it, though. So we're going to talk about the process of failing, what fails first, and which cognitive functions are most sensitive. You could probably guess, but I'm going to talk about it. So, not all cognitive functions are created equal when it comes to fatigue, right? Research in our field, of course, suggests a clear hierarchy of vulnerability. Executive functioning and fluid reasoning tend to be the first to go. This is probably not a surprise to anyone. I feel like poor executive functioning, it just it's the first thing to take a hit in like pretty much um, any scenario that's non-optimal. So also the case here. So for example, a task like the Wisconsin card sort or some kind of like matrix reasoning, something like that, they require pretty heavy lifting. Once that effort versus value calculation shifts toward energy conservation, these scores, or effort on these tasks will likely go down pretty sharply. And as clinicians, we might see this and say, oh, this could be a sign of executive dysfunction or, poor reasoning or whatever interpretation we want to assign to that task. So executive functioning and fluid reasoning are the first to go. On the other side, though, crystallized intelligence, like vocabulary or just general fund of knowledge, is remarkably fatigue resistant for the most part. So for us, I think this creates a little bit of a dangerous diagnostic trap where your patient might still sound articulate and kind of with it during verbal tasks, which is masking the fact that their fluid reasoning and attention networks have largely gone offline, right? So they might appear to have it together, but in fact, under the hood, that trash or debris is building up, that glutamate is building up. So many clinicians, report that processing speed tasks like coding, for example, show a little bit of a U-shaped curve. Now, this is not like totally validated in the research, but a lot of people report this U-shaped curve where performance dips in the middle of the day and then sometimes like rallies at the end when the patient sees the finish line. But again, we don't know, statistically if that is actually reliable or not. It seems to differ across different populations, and we just need more data on that. So again, just to recap, executive functioning and fluid reasoning are going to be the first to go, but crystallized intelligence, vocabulary, fund of knowledge, et cetera, is generally going to remain intact. So you end up with a kind of wicked combination that you need to be aware of there. All right. So what can we do to actually change things up or adapt to combat this fatigue during our testing days? We can't change the biological limits of the human brain, of course, but we can change, I think, how we interface with it. So I'm going to give you like 3 concrete practices that you can implement to try to combat this phenomenon. So the first one, I guess I would call it like the heavy to light rotation. And some of you are probably already doing these things either deliberately or intuitively, but I'm just going to kind of put a name and a little bit of a structure to it. And some of you, this might be new, and that's totally okay too. So, like I said, the first thing is what I'm calling the heavy to light rotation. So this is just your permission to stop following the administration manual's standard order if it places your most difficult executive functioning tasks at the end. You want to front load things that require memory and coding, fluid reasoning, etc. Put those in the first 90 minutes, if at all possible, and then put your more low effort tasks like motor speed or cancellation or like personality inventories and things like that for the last hour of the day, if at all possible. Second strategy is something called like a 90-minute pivot and a little bit of a movement reset. So pivot and reset. Research on just like circadian rhythms tend to show that our cognitive performance generally cycles every like 90 to 120 minutes. So don't wait for the patient to look tired, right? You can schedule a mandatory quote unquote movement break at the 90-minute mark. That's always safe, err on the side of shorter versus longer. Now, there's a lot of variability here. So, for kids, it could be shorter. Sometimes you'll get super focused adults who can maybe push to 120 minutes. But the idea is to, again, plan, movement break at a specific time. where you get them out of the chair, like walk down the hall. And a physical reset like this helps to clear the buildup a little bit of both the adenosine, which is implicated in tiredness, but also other like metabolic byproducts that are, associated with some of these concerns. So plan a movement break. Don't wait for the client to say that they're tired or need a break. We've certainly had a lot of adults who just want to power through, and I'm always kind of amazed at these folks. And they don't take breaks, they don't drink water, they don't go to the bathroom, they don't eat, and research would say that that is probably not the best way to go about things. All right. Speaking of eating, the last point is going to center around glycemic management. Okay. So many of you probably know that the brain is just like a complete glucose hog. So it consumes probably 20% of the body's energy at any given time. And as I talked about at the beginning, cognitive processing requires a lot of metabolic effort. So executive functions are particularly sensitive to drops in blood sugar. So instead of doing like a single big lunch, where the person just takes a lunch break, goes and eats a lot, and then comes back in the afternoon, that can lead to that thing that many of us have experienced, which is feeling sleepy in the afternoon. It's like the food coma. This happens to me quite often. Try to do like small, low glycemic snacks throughout the day, providing like a handful of nuts, piece of fruit. You can map this onto those 60, 90, or 120-minute breaks. I think that's great overlap and kind of synchronicity that you can shoot for. Take breaks, eat snacks, drink water. But yeah, providing these things can like biologically kind of re-up the fuel that is needed to maintain this metabolically taxing activity that we call testing. And I can just say for us, this was a big unlock, I suppose, from a few years ago when we, just decided to stock like almost a whole separate pantry just for client snacks. And yes, it's an expense. Yes, it's hard to master dietary constraints and whatnot, but it's totally worth it, So, for one, we have a lot of people who show up without snacks, either by choice or by forgetting. We also have a lot of kids who show up kind of underfed, and having good kind of healthy low glycemic snacks on board and available just goes a long way for many reasons, but not the least of which is to help maintain metabolic energy, just for the testing that we're doing. So going to start to wrap up here. Just to recap, testing fatigue, is not just a nuisance for us, but it is actually a threat to the validity of our data. And there have been many times over the years where I've questioned, and my employees and supervisees have questioned, hey, is this data actually valid? This kid seemed exceptionally tired, and you're not imagining that. So by just kind of understanding, again, basic understanding of the metabolic costs in the prefrontal cortex and implementing some of these strategies that I just mentioned, I think that can go a long way toward, combating what we are seeing as fatigue during testing day. So we are going to continue to maintain this 1-day testing protocol. It just works well, for our practice for many reasons, practically, logistically, and clinically. But implementing some of these strategies, if you're doing longer testing days, can go a long way to making sure that you're ensuring optimal effort. Okay. Like I said, today was the first episode in this sprint for the rest of the month. Tomorrow, we're going to stay in the clinical pillar, and we're going to be talking about something that a lot of us have heard of, but we haven't actually discussed on the podcast before. So this will be a little bit of an intro / exploration of adult ADHD versus concepts like sluggish cognitive tempo and cognitive disengagement syndrome, which is the newer construct to explore in this realm. Hope to see you then. And again, if you have not liked or subscribed or followed, if it's Spotify, please do so, and you'll get all these episodes downloaded automatically. Thanks for being here.